Good afternoon, and welcome to the Jernix webinar titled Federal Government Contracting, It's a Whole New World. My name is Claire Augustine, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. First, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We promise to have you back to work in 1 hour. Now for a few housekeeping items. Since you're attending this webinar live, we'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you that will include a PDF of today's presentation, as well as any additional resources. Next, you can expand the screen for better viewing of today's presentation using the % icon on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And finally, you can submit questions online anytime during the presentation via the Questions tab. I'll be collecting your questions as the presentation goes forward and reading them at the end during our Q&A time. Our agenda today will be quite straightforward. First, Wes will take us through the webinar, then we'll begin responding to your submitted questions during the Q&A. And now let me hand you over to Wes Fue.
Thanks, Claire, and let me add my welcome to Claire's for today's webinar. It's going to be a lot of information and a comparatively short period of time, but what we're going to try to do is establish for you the distinction and difference for doing business with the federal government versus maybe your commercial efforts. I'm going to introduce myself here in just a couple of seconds, but before we do this, I'd like to kind of get a sense of who's out there watching. And Claire, if we can go ahead and do the first poll question, and then I'll introduce myself, and then we'll get the answers to the poll after my introduction.
Our first poll is your business primarily focused on, and please select one, products, services, or both?
Okay, what I'll do while we're waiting for y'all to answer is briefly tell you a little bit about me. First of all, I'm a retired federal employee. I did 29 years. Most of which was in or around federal law enforcement. I was at Customs Service, the old immigration, finished with Homeland Security, and throughout that career, I was involved from time to time either as an operational end user or as a decision maker towards the end of my career in acquisitions. I was what's called a contracting officer technical rep, and I wasn't actually a contracting officer, but because I was on the operational end and because I actually made the final decision on which product or service we would acquire for the agency, I had to be trained in contracting. So you'll hear the term on the federal side, and some of you may already be familiar with it, COTAR, Contracting Officer Technical Rep. And I never kept track of it because I just didn't think I was going to use this information 30 years later. But I've acquired for the federal government certainly hundreds of millions of dollars worth of product and service, possibly billions. I just don't know because it was just over that extended period of time. I've trained over 2,000 businesses in a part of what you're going to get today about how to do business with the federal government. Today's section is really focusing you on how different it might be and how similar it might be as well. But it is different, and it's important that you understand some of those differences. Before I go ahead, Claire, do we have any answers on our polling question?
Yes, we do. 100% say that they do both products and services.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a key element because normally I tell folks that are in product, you should consider going into services, and if you're just a service, maybe you should consider doing product. So that's fantastic that you're involved in both. Now, one of the key elements of anything that you're going to do with the federal government, and you may have already heard the term, but it's critical that you understand that we're going to be talking about the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or the FAR, Get used to that term, because whenever you're talking to a contracting officer or a contracting specialist, they're going to be talking from the FAR. This directive or series of directives is what identifies what the rules are, not only for you but for the federal government as well. Sometimes when you go through them, and if you've had any experience already in looking at some of the requests for proposal or quotes, you may have noticed that they would state that the FAR, it's usually 52-212 or 213 or 215. What they're doing there is they don't want to regurgitate or repeat verbatim what certain items are that must be included in every solicitation or request for you to submit a quote or proposal. It's important that you understand where you see incorporated by reference. If you don't recognize it, you need to go read it and make sure you understand it. This is a critical word, understand, because when you make a bid and complete that request for proposal or quote, when you sign it, you're telling contracting officers that you have read and understood the FAR. As you can see there, there's a web address you can go to take a look at the FAR and find any of those incorporated by references. The key element on this screen is it levels the playing field. There is no other entity that I know of, and I have owned my own business for 6 years now, and I do business with state and local governments. I do commercial training. I do a host of things. I have never encountered a more level playing field with specific guidance and rules that apply to everyone than what the FAR establishes for doing business with the federal government. Some of the things that you're going to be accountable for, and these are the highlights. As I said, you must verify by your signature that you've read and understood the FAR, and if there are any other regulations. If you do anything with the Department of Defense, you'll see that they have the DFARs. It's kind of a repeat of the FAR, but they have very specific additional guidance and directions. For example, under country of origin, there are certain things that you cannot buy from excluded countries like China, North Korea, those kinds of things. You'll see that in the DFAR specifically. 3 critical elements that you understand is if you're going to engage the federal government, they are going to require that you maintain proper timekeeping procedures. That's more specific to your service orientation than your product orientation, obviously, because if you're selling a product, you sell a product, and that's that. But if they're going to be paying you on a contract to provide some sort of service for them, they're going to expect you to track your employees or your time that is specific to a specific contract. Of course, as you already are aware, Jernix offers some great program and project management software. It'll help you. It's DCAA compliant. That's the Defense Contract Audit Agency. It'll help you do this in an easier fashion. You also have to demonstrate how you oversee your cost accounting system. You may have to tell them how you maintain a cost accounting system, because they really do want to know where their money's going. And remember this, it's not their money, it's our money that we're spending. So think of it that way. There are almost always some sort of reporting requirement, and that'll be specifically identified to you in the request for proposal or request for quote. They may ask you to report on a monthly basis or quarterly basis on status of your effort, those kinds of things. But those will be spelled out for you. Just so we all start from the same place, it's important that you understand that the federal fiscal year does not always match what you might be accustomed to or what you've established as your fiscal year. Some people are from 1 January to 31 December. Well, the federal government works differently. It works from October 1st to the following September 30th. So we are right now at the end of the second quarter for the federal government. First was obviously October, November, December. We're January, February, March. you're going to see in the next couple of months, and certainly within the next quarter, you're going to see a lot of activity because it takes a while for agencies, and I mean all the way down to where the rubber meets the road, folks, the operational people, for them to get their funding, and you're going to start to see them acquire goods and services because they need to spend it. It's called use or lose. If you don't use it, you'll lose it because, and please don't laugh, they really do try to balance the budget. And they do that by long in July, and certainly by August they start to look at if on the federal side you've spent the money that you've been provided, and if you don't and someone is overspent, they're going to take that money away from that federal operational individual, and they're going to take it somewhere else to where they can balance the budget. State cycles generally run from the 1st of July to the following 30th of June, and county and city cycles, there's just too many. So all I can suggest to you is if you want to do business with them, and I encourage you to do business with state and local governments as well, check on their fiscal year. It's important for your planning because if you're looking at the end of the year for you is, say, December, well, that's the middle of the year for most states, and it's already at the end of the first quarter for the federal government. So it's just something to keep in mind as you do your planning. One of the biggest benefits about the federal government is they are essentially recession-proof. And I asked this question openly, what do they do when they run out of money? Well, they make more money. They manufacture more money as long as they make. That's not what we're accustomed to. You know, if we run out of money, we close down or we cut back or whatever the case may be. And although the government does cut back in certain areas, they're open for business 24/7, 365, and they always will be. It's pretty much a growth industry, as you can see here, because I can only think of one time when there was a drastic cut in federal funding, and you have to go back to the 70s for that. They generally increase their funding every year, or at the very least, they maintain funding levels from the previous year. So that's a pretty good client to have. And they're not going anywhere. That's the other good thing. These are some of the key benefits. When I say no marketing dollars, I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about something called resell, and that's FedBid. And I mean, when I say no marketing dollars, I really guess should make it more specific. Advertising dollars don't need to be spent. Yes, I guess if you looked, obviously there has to be a return on investment of your time. That has a cost to you and an expense to you. But in the strictest definition of marketing and advertising, you really don't have to spend any money to hook up and get contracts with the federal government. When I say that you can reduce and often eliminate competition, we're going to discuss very briefly, and it's more of something we discussed in our previous webinar last month. That is, if you're in a set-aside situation, if you're in a small business, the federal government has to spend 26% of every federal dollar on a small business. And there are set-asides within that. There's veteran service disabled veteran woman-owned, 8As, Hub Zone. You may have heard of all of these. So it's potentially an opportunity for, in some of those situations, to eliminate competition. What's really interesting about this is there are national and local opportunities. I like to ask my clients, are you global and mobile? That means, are you willing to take business or engage in business outside of the federal government or outside of your area? Because the federal government is everywhere. I tell people that there's an American flag on the moon, and one day there's going to be a contracting officer sitting right underneath that flag. Now that certainly is probably not going to happen in our lifetime, but you never know. They're everywhere. I'm sure you're aware of federal agencies that are in your local area. Well, they're all around the planet, and so it's an excellent client to take on. They purchase over 11 million different products and services. The breakdown for you is 70% of the amount they spend is via their solicitations. About 30% of that is product, obviously, and that makes sense. I think you'll agree, because services cost more than buying a widget. You know, if I wanted an hour of your time, that's going to cost me more than to buy, you know, a gross of widgets generally. And they do it through a number of ways. Up to $3,000, they do micro purchase. That's a purchase card or P card, you may have heard, and that's where they just buy something from you, and it's a card swipe in essence. $150,000 is pretty much anything less than that is pretty much a nuisance buy. That's called simplified acquisition. Is anything under $150,000, that's anything product or service. And you can actually go up to $5 million for most small business deals, and in some cases, it can be as high as $6.5 million, and that's still considered a small business deal. And of course, I think I know the answer. Will this help you meet any current challenges? Generally, the answer to that question is yes, especially if you want to grow your business. How do they buy? I talked about micro purchases and a host of others. State and local, it's mostly an informal bid. Simplified acquisition, they can actually are permitted by the FAR to call 3 businesses and get 3 bids and ask you to submit a bid. Sealed bidding are those that are posted generally on Federal Business Opportunities or FBO. We'll briefly discuss that towards the end of today. And then, of course, there's a negotiated procurement where that's most cases that's a request for proposal. It can be a request for quote, but that also is going to be posted. Anything above $25,000 is required to be posted on FBO, federalbusinessopportunities.gov. But there's still a lot of stuff they buy that's under $25,000, and you're going to see that not posted. But that's that simplified acquisition threshold in the micro purchase. So there's many ways to skin the federal cat. I briefly discussed micro purchase. Anything under $3,000, they don't have to compete it. They just buy it. Office supplies are the most prominent that come to mind. But I've purchased training from individuals that was under $3,000. There's a host of things that they can do as long as it doesn't exceed $3 grand per acquisition, and they'll just use their government credit card. Again, a simplified acquisition are up to 150 different federal agencies. Some of them obviously are much larger than others, and maybe they have a different approach to how they want to use the simplified acquisition threshold, but it is in the FAR, and all agencies have the same guidance. There's not you get to interpret it this way, the U.S. Army, and you get to interpret it this way, the Department of Agriculture. It's all the same for everyone. And you can procure items from the CO directly if there's an urgent need for things that are under $25,000. And I think you probably are all catching the drift here. This is about relationship building. You need to be conducting a little bit of outreach to COs so they know where to find you if they want to do that. Excuse me. I've already mentioned these are the primary types of solicitation. A request for quote is generally used to obtain product. They will use it to obtain services. The primary issues that they evaluate items on is price and delivery. I wholeheartedly suggest that you pay attention to the last statement here. Do not leave money on the table. Make sure that any quote you give is fully loaded. Any overhead that you pay to exist, any general and administrative costs. Remember, you're going to have to manage that contract, and that involves your time. Don't leave that element out. Obviously, your markup needs to be included. People are always asking me, businesses are always asking me, well, what should my markup be? I'm going to tell you that that is a threshold of pain issue. I cannot answer that for you. I don't know how far you're willing to go down in your markup to pursue the contract. That's the threshold of pain. I don't know what it is. 20%, 30%, 40%, I can't address that. That's really up to you. An invitation for bid is based on price only. What you'll see in an IFP, that's mostly construction contracts, but you'll see IFPs for other items, but they'll be construction related, refurbishment, restructure, those kinds of things, where you would just submit, it's a fixed price. They can still negotiate with you, but that's really not what the IFP is intended to do. So know that that's primarily what you'll see in invitation for bid. Some states commingle terms with what the federal indicates. Some states will say all of their stuff is an invitation to bid. That's just something that you'll have to learn to decipher. But in the federal context, that's what it means. It's primarily price only. The big one, and this is primarily for services, is the request for proposal. This is the most involved of your bid response documents. You're going to have to tell them what your capabilities and your capacity to perform those capabilities are. They may ask you to define the expertise on your staff, or do you use subcontractors, and what's their abilities. Past performance may be a critical element, and let's talk about that. A lot of times my clients tell me, well, I don't have any federal past performance. Well, that's okay. I spent $1.6 million acquiring services from a company that had never worked for the federal government before. So what you need to identify is commensurate past performance. If they're asking you to build a mountain, and you've built mountains in the commercial world, tell them, well, this is my past performance. Does it help if you have federal past performance? I would say yes, but as I've just expressed to you, that's not for most is that deciding factor. Sometimes people say, well, they've already decided on somebody. Well, folks, if you're thinking of that, then that's the recipe for failure, because that's simply not true. They do use people they've used before, and you want to be one of those. But they will take a look at your capacity and your capability. The two critical sections are the technical and the cost volumes. That's almost always how RFPs are broken down. Technical, how are you going to do it, who's going to do it, what's their background, and then cost, obviously, how much you're going to charge it to do it for us. This can be negotiated. It's important that you understand. I just had a client of mine in Florida just went through a cost negotiation 2 weeks ago, and Monday they were informed that they won the contract. So once you're in that final, and they only got there because they passed the technical phase. So they kind of go together, but they can be discussed. This is all driven by what's called the uniform contract format. There are A through Z sections, but we're going to focus on C, L, and M. I'm a small business. It's just me. Time is money. You look at some of these RFPs, and they're anywhere from 50 to 250 pages long, and you say, how can I even read that to help me make a bid, no bid decision? These three sections, C, L, and M, will help you do this quickly. If you take nothing else away from today's webinar, I want you to focus on this next few slides. This work statement tells you what they need, where they need it, how they might want it. It identifies specifications, but sometimes it's vague, and you have questions. Well, how does that happen? Well, let me tell you how that happens. The operational folks are not contracting people. They may be aware of the FAR, but they don't have a specific understanding of the necessity to make sure that anything that's put out that is posted as a solicitation has to take into account all of the potential respondents. That's what the FAR mandates. Well, ops guys just want to do their job. They have a mission to perform, and it ain't contracting. So it's called the discovery of need. They discover they need something, and they say, well, let's go get it. Let's post something. Let's get something. Let's get some people in here to do this for us. And they go to the contracting officer. Well, now the contracting officer here is focused on the FAR. And although they're located on an operational base or office, they're not operational people. So this is how it gets vague. Sometimes it's difficult for the ops guy to convey exactly what they need to the contracting officer. So depending on their working relationship, they're humans too. They're not autotrons. They maybe put something out is what they thought the ops guy told them. And you'll read it because you're an expert in the field. You go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, you can contact the contracting officer, or if you ever see them list the name and phone number of the COTAR, the COTR, contracting officer technical rep, you call that person because that's the ops person. If they're not the ops person, they're sitting right across the hall from or next to the ops person that has requested that. Oh, and my slides are jamming up for some reason. Oh, there we go. The next one is Section L. Section L is instructions to offerers. Now, this is what's cool about the federal government. They're going to give you instructions on how to submit, and it's going to be very, very specific. They may give you other instructions on, there might be a site visit or a pre-conference or a pre-solicitation conference or a pre-bid conference would be instructions. And by the way, if you ever see that and you can make it to a site visit, please go. If for no other reason, you get to look at the opposition. And you can also, at that time, you can ask as many questions as you want. But generally in instructions, what they're going to talk to you about is the submission date and time. Ladies and gentlemen, if it's due at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, you better make sure it's there before then, because if it arrives at 2:01 on Tuesday, and these things are date stamped, you have just been disqualified. And think about that for a second. It's fair. The rest of us have got it in there by 2 o'clock, but you showed up at 3. Well, that's not fair to us, that you are now going to be considered. When they tell you they want 5 copies, please don't be a nice person and send them 6. That extra copy or 2. That's not what they asked for. And that was not an arbitrary number. I had generally 4 division chiefs under me, and I wanted them to look at it. So I'd ask for 5 copies, 1 for me and 1 for each of my division chiefs, so they could look at it. So that number just didn't appear out of anywhere. It comes from what the ops people have requested. If you send 6 of them, let me tell you what that happens. First of all, that violates what they directed you to do. And I know you're thinking, oh, I'll give them an extra copy. Well, contracting officers order everything. A contracting officer will order everything from copy paper to ammunition to training to construction. They generally are not commodity experts because they simply just can't be. They have to order for so many different items. So if you're sending it assuming that the contracting officer will figure out what you're talking about and you're sending an extra copy and 100 people respond, that's 100 extra copies. And if that contracting officer has 10 of these items, that's 1,000 extra copies. So really focus on what they ask you to do. They will tell you in some cases the format. Please don't be creative. Just give it to them like they ask for it, and then of course make sure that if they ask you to identify the distinction between your technical and cost proposal section, please do that. Product's going to tell you about shipping and how to market. That's primarily Department of Defense provides marking instructions because DoD is so large that if they get shipped something, it goes straight into inventory, and you'll see barcoding requirements, those kinds of things. If you're confused about that, you can ask the contracting officer about that, especially when you win. you'll be able to submit that. One of the key elements is the discussion of brand name or equal. This is one of the places I go first when I look at anything that's going to be product related. I go immediately searching for brand name or equal, because if they're asking for Sony televisions, and I don't sell Sony televisions, why would I want to read one more iota of this 75-page document? Pitch it. If it says brand name only, as in what I've just described, and you can't provide them the brand name, throw it away. But if it says brand name or equal, they'll say, well, we prefer Sony, but here's the specs. It's got to be a 42-inch. It's got to be HD. It's got to have remote control, blah, 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 blah. And here you are, the Wes Fue television manufacturing company, and you can make those specs or exceed them. Then by all means, proceed. So brand name or equal is a good way, especially on the product side of the house, to narrow this down immediately for you. If they're asking services, they'll define how you prepare that. It'll tell you where the location, the place of performance will be. If there's any unique scheduling requirements, they'll even go down to telling you that the office is normally open from 8 to 5 and is not open on the following holidays. I mean, it can be very, very specific for you, for them to identify to you on services. They may tell you you only have 2 hours a day and there are 2,000 students to train in X number of days or weeks. Well, that's in Section L. You go in there and you look at that and you say, well, I can't do that. That's too many and too short a time. Well, that's a no bid. Don't read another sentence. Pitch it. Move on. Because I tell you what, there will be another one. Section M is the coolest thing about doing business with the federal government. It's required by the FAR that they tell you up front how they intend to evaluate you and what the basis for award will be. I challenge you to go to any of your commercial customers or clients and say, hey, I want to compete for this job I hear the solicitation you're putting out there. Tell me how you guys are going to evaluate us. Or tell me how you're going to decide who wins and who loses. Nothing will happen. They won't tell you anything because they don't have to. Well, in this environment, the federal government must tell you that. Some people go to Section M first because they want to take a look at how they're going to be evaluated, and if they can't meet those evaluation criteria, they say, well, I'm not going to proceed. They will tell you what constitutes a responsive bid. If you don't provide them what they tell you is a responsive bid, guess what? You don't go a step further because they're telling you what they want. It'll tell you about some certain compliance requirements that's generally compliance with the FAR. The neatest thing about it is that they will give you the evaluation factors in order of importance. Those are not listed there willy-nilly or helter-skelter. They are there specifically in order of importance. Do not confuse this list of evaluation factors and their order with the list of the factors identified under basis for award. When it says basis for award, that's just them telling you here's what we're going to look at. But the evaluation factors will be listed in order of importance. In fact, I just read a modification yesterday to a request for proposal that came out where they changed the order of importance in the evaluation factors. Generally for product, they're going to talk, I told you, price and delivery. They may say delivery and price. And under services, it's generally your technical proposal, but it could be your cost proposal. But they're going to tell you that. And when they say delivery and price, that means they need it right away, or there's something that's driving the bus that getting the product or service is what's more important, which generally means they'll pay more. When they say price and delivery, that means, well, we're really kind of focused on getting the best value And they really do try to focus on best value. That's more important than you getting it to us quickly. So price is their main consideration. One of the absolute things that's important, and then I think we'll go to another poll question, Claire. One of the absolute most important things is that you always precisely follow the instructions. It's absolutely critical that you follow what they've told you. So now let's go ahead and, Claire, we have another poll question.
All right, our next poll is use one of the following words that best describes your opinion of the overall government contracting process. So choose one of these. Too much paperwork. They've already decided who they want. You have to know someone to get a contract, or it's difficult to understand the regulations.
And while we do that, I'm going to go through the next slide, and then we'll see how the folks responded. There are also some proactive opportunities that I want to talk to you about. One of the huge ones is what's called sources sought. And that's where they need more information about industry capabilities, and that's us, or industry, to determine if they want to set it aside or not set it aside for small business. And this is where you get to tell them how good you are. If it's a sole source, they'll ask you some questions. Sometimes they're very specific questions. Sometimes it's, hey, how would you accomplish what we've just identified to you as our need? The coolest part about a sole source is you get to build a relationship with a client. We've just done that. I have another client in Alabama. We've just done that with EPA, and it was as simple as sending an email to a contracting officer, and we've begun to build a relationship with that specific contracting officer for the services that they deliver. And the cool thing is it may, not always, but it might result in what's called a sole source, and that means you win. So, okay, do we have answers on the poll?
Yes, we do. 100% said that it's difficult to understand the regulations.
Okay, and I'll tell you, I did this for 30 years, and I cannot tell you that I completely understand them. I'm more comfortable with them. The thing that you will discover ultimately is it's not hard, but it is cumbersome. And those are two very different words. Hard means difficult. Cumbersome could be difficult, but cumbersome just means it's weighty. There's a lot to it. And part of that is understanding the regulations. They're written in government speak. I can't tell you over a period of 30 years where I would get a new directive and just sit there and scratch my head. But the cool part is if you don't understand it, you can reach out to them, to the contracting officer, and ask for some interpretation of what they're asking for. Or you could use someone like myself, or there's other people. You can go to small business development centers. There's all kinds of avenues for you to get clarification on things that you don't understand. I will tell you that the FAR is way easier to understand now than it was just 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And they're trying to, every year they try to make improvements on it, but it's a lot of stuff to correct, and make easier to read. But you're not alone in that regard. Just know that there are places you can go to get answers to help you. Okay, let's look at, I don't know why there we go. Another proactive opportunity is an RFI, request for information. That's where they're trying to just find out, who's out there that does. We want to build a spaceship to go to the moon. Does anybody out there know how to build a spaceship to go to the moon? And can you tell us how we should approach this? This is where you can shape the bid. I've had clients that answered RFIs, and then when the request for proposal came out, verbatim, what was provided to them in that RFI is put in the request for proposal. So that's pretty cool. I mean, they're rare, but they do come out. You'll find this generally in research products or solicitations, those kinds of things, but they are there. Now, where do you find all this stuff? We've talked about the FedBizOps or FBO.gov. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is where the federal government is required to put anything over $25,000. You can do a keyword search. Let me give you a tip under that keyword solicitation right up in here. If there's a number in a dash in the solicitation, take that out. And if you use more than one word, if you have 2 words or more, put it in quotations. Those are called Boolean operators. If you just typed in the 2 words, it would search those 2 words individually. You want to get registered down as a vendor or a citizen. It's pretty easy to do. You do have to be on what's called CCR, which is the Central Contractor Register. You need to be on that. There are just over 600,000 businesses that are registered to do business with the government. That sounds like a lot. But guess what? There are about 24 to 26 million businesses in this country. So 600,000 isn't a whole lot when you start to think in that perspective. So it sounds like a lot of competition. But against all the companies that are out there, it's pretty reduced. But you would want to get registered on FBO. It offers you, we don't have time to go over, but it offers you ways to set up automatic emails to you on areas of interest, those kinds of things. I want to talk to you very quickly about GSA Schedules. Some of you may have heard of them. If you've been in business for 2 years, 1 year for product, 2 years for services, and you've done, they say $50,000 to $100,000 in gross revenue, you should consider getting on a GSA schedule. Now, you do have to go through an application process, and that in and of itself, I would highly recommend that you have someone help you. People do these by themselves. Companies do these by themselves all the time, but it just would be easier for you. Of course, there's an investment associated with that. But what it is a preferred vendor list. In fact, what GSA calls them is pre-competed on-demand vendors, because they're going to negotiate price for your product or service, and you will have a set quote. Now, one of the cool things is you don't have to bid. You can just go market directly to the federal government. Say, I'm on a schedule. You can just call me. So they're a pretty powerful tool. In fact, I say that the GSA schedule is probably the single most important tool that you could have in your business toolkit. We go from the 600,000 I mentioned down to anywhere between 9 and 11,000, and you can get down to as few as one competitor. If you're, for example, service-disabled veteran and we're in a specific schedule, there may only be one competitor in there. I've seen that. So that's really, really a powerful tool to have. And another cool thing is it's a 20-year contract. It's issued 5 years at a time. Once you get on the schedule, you have it for 5 years. Now, you have to do $25,000 in sales every year over that 5-year period, minimum. So, and I've been called in to help companies that are in their last year and they didn't do any sales for the previous 2 years. Generally, GSA lets those contracts just expire. Then you have to wait a year, and then you can go try to get on the schedule again. But those that use this do pretty well. So the 20-year contract, if you get to the end of the 5 years and you have that average, they renew it again. And they do it again, and they do it again. That's a 20-year contract, and that's solely relationship-based. A lot of, or most of it, as you can see, that are on GSA are small business. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to post looking for small business. It's just that that's the way most of it is. Whoops, didn't want to do that. There's another way for you to expand your business, and that's through what's called resell. If you are already registered in CCR and ready to do business with the government, this will let you do business today. You can generate cash flow now. It's a way to diversify your income. You can sell any commercial product. Sometimes services are on there, but it's primarily product driven. You become the matchmaker or the middleman. It's very, very powerful. It's reverse eBay. They look for the lowest possible price, and you win. Minimal paperwork. It tells you what all the terms and conditions are. What's cool is you can set up auto bid, so you get to set an absolute low bid for any items that you might be interested in. And by the way, this has exceeded 1,000 bids a week already. So this is where agencies post what they need. You go, you get on, you identify in there. You can make it as specific as you want. This is what it looks like. You obviously are a seller. You can get on there. That's fedbid.com. You get yourself registered in there. You can have it send emails to you every day. This is perfect for small business where you don't have time to go looking for this stuff all the time. You can make a bid, and like I said, you can say, I'm in at $100 and I'm out at $75. That means that as it's driven down automatically, you know, you bid 100, I bid 99. It goes to 98 to you, goes to 97 for me. And if you're out at 75, when it gets to 75, it pulls you out of there. That's your threshold of pain. Well, my threshold of pain might be $70, so it keeps me bidding, auto bid, until either it reaches $70 or I win. So that's pretty powerful stuff. So it's fedbid.com. Some things that you need to know if you're going to be a reseller. Sometimes your state may require that you get a resale certificate. I live in Colorado. That's not a requirement unless I'm ordering something from a distributor and shipping it, and they ship it to me first, and then I have to reship it. Well, that means that I am a storefront. But if I just drop ship it directly from the manufacturer to the federal agency, I don't need a resale certificate. But you need to check on that for your own state. Also, it's a good thing if you have the ability to accept their credit card, and that's generally called a merchant account. You can go to your bank. You can go online. There's all kinds of ways to do that. What you don't need is inventory, because you're going to drop ship it. I'm going to order. They want 1,000 pairs of sneakers. I call Nike as they ship it to California, and they do it, and it gets there, and everybody's happy, and then I get paid by the federal government. You don't need employees. You don't need office space. You can do this at the library if you want to, and you generally don't have to have any kind of past performance because they just want their stuff at a good price. That's another beauty of resale and using FedBid. That's where you can go on fedbid.com. I included FedBiz Ops or FBO because sometimes you will see on FBO they'll refer you to FedBid, and FedBid will have all the information you need. It'll give you the line item listing of what they're buying and how many they want. For those of you that do both, I'm going to suggest to you, product and service, that you just focus on product at first. And then you might be a manufacturer, or you may already have great working relationships with manufacturers where you can get best possible price. So when you make your bid electronically, you actually load it in there. It's right there, and then next thing you know, they'll notify you that you've won. Then you go back to your supplier or distributor, and at that time, before you finalize your order, say, hey, is this the best price you can give me? Because they might lower it again. And then you have it shipped, and you get paid. Don't forget about shipping. People forget sometimes about their shipping costs. So when you're talking to other suppliers, distributor, ask them what it will cost to ship to whatever location. So here again, we've covered a lot of information. Here are your responsibilities. You got to know the FAR. You don't have to be an expert in the FAR, but you got to know it and understand it when you're signing your name to a bid. We've talked about how you can quickly review solicitations. Try to establish that relationship with the contracting officers. Talk a little bit about how you would prepare your cost volume proposals. Make sure that you complete your representations, inserts, and other forms. Always lead negotiations. If they call you to discuss the pricing, you take over. At the end of everything, whether you win, lose, or draw, always request a debrief. The folks that I told you about earlier that just won the contract, it's $1.7 million with the Armed Forces Retirement Home, they asked for debriefing. The contracting officer actually said, why, you won it? And they said, well, we want to know what you like about us because we want to repeat that. We want to emulate success. And participate in protests if you feel something's protestable, and let me tell you very quickly what that means. Somebody else won. You have to prove, it's incumbent upon you to prove that the government made a mistake by awarding this to that other company. And if you can't prove that they made a mistake and give them solid information, you do not have a basis for a protest. Here brings us full circle. Got to comply with the FAR. You make sure you maintain proper timekeeping procedures, you have cost accounting systems, and you adhere to any reporting requirements that they ask. Now, that's a ton of information. Here's my phone number, my email address. I am a full-service provider. I get involved in all aspects of this, but I hope that you found this helpful. So, Claire, I guess we could open it up for questions.
Thank you, Wes. We'll now start the Q&A portion of our presentation. If you haven't already done so, please submit your questions via the Questions tab. So our first question comes from Susan. Susan asks, can a manufacturer use the Fed bid reverse eBay process?
Yes, absolutely. The only stipulation for anybody using Fed bid is you have to be registered on CCR, that's the Central Contractor Register, and then there's another online thing that you do that's called ORCA, that's Online Representations and Certifications. You have to complete that. None of this is rocket science, but it does take time to do it. But absolutely, anybody that's registered in CCR as a business can go compete via Fed bid.
Thank you, Wes. Our next question comes from Sarah. Sarah asks, if the government is already using our product and they need some more, is there a way that we can obtain a priority in the bidding process?
Yes, that requires a little bit lengthy of an answer, but one of the things is if they're already using the product that you provided to them, you want to reach out to the individuals that purchased it from you because you have a different access portal. You can actually go to the people that bought from you, or you can do research. There's ways to find out who the contracting officer is or the actual operations manager is that is handling that. You reach out to them directly and say, hey, the example I gave you, the sneakers, you guys bought these sneakers from us, and I know they wear out, so you probably need some more sneakers. So how about you acquire from us directly? Now, depending on their agency limitation, meaning the amount, if it's under $3,000, that's a no-brainer. They can just buy it from you. If it's under $150,000, they may be required to get 2 other additional quotes. You can help them that way, by the way. You can say, well, I can tell you that the X company sells them for, we sell them for 45, X company sells them for 50, and the Y company sells them for $51, and you're helping them. But that's about the only stipulation. If they wanted to do large quantity, then they may have a requirement to put it out for what they call full and open competition. But yes, you try to drive that bus for them.
Thanks, Wes. Our next question comes from Kelly. Kelly asks, will agencies always contact you to tell you if you've lost the contract?
Good question. The answer is no. They're required to identify to the winner that they've won, obviously. There's no specification that they tell the people that didn't win, you didn't win. They almost always do. They try to, but it's not timely. You're not going to find out right away. They're going to tell the winner right away. But there's nothing that mandates them to tell you. I'll tell you what, especially under 150,000 simplified acquisition, there's no requirement at all for them to tell you that you lost. So some agencies are better at it than others.
Thank you, Wes. Our next question comes from Jennifer. Jennifer asks, can I ask the agency what my final rating was?
A good question. Yes, you can. In fact, I encourage you to. If you don't hear anything, either you're aware of the award or they've told you that you didn't win, that's that debrief. And let me tell you this, don't ask them closed-end questions. Don't say, did I not win because of my pricing? Because they'll say, yeah. What you want to do is use words like describe. Please describe to me the evaluation process which determined best price or best delivery. But yes, you can. Ask them where you were exactly in that listing or the final decision, I mean.
Thank you, Wes. Our next question comes from Melissa. Melissa asks, does the P card you mentioned require signing up?
No, the P card is the other way. The P card is, they're going to use their government card to acquire something from you. There is one requirement. If you sign up with the agency, the answer is no. You cannot be awarded a federal contract unless you're registered on CCR. That's just the way it is, but let me give you the reality of that. If I need something like 10 cases of print paper and I call you, I'm generally not going to ask you, are you on CCR? I'm just going to ask you for your quote. But it would make sense for you to try to get on CCR anyway. I know that's kind of a jumbled answer, and it's just the way it is. I apologize for that.
That's all right, Wes. That was a good answer. Our next question comes from Chris. Chris asks, can I ask the agency who the other competitors are?
That's a good question. Yes, you can ask. They're under no obligation to tell you. They will not tell you on the front end. That means, the solicitation closes on the 15th of April. They're not going to tell you anything until afterwards. You can do what's called a Freedom of Information Act request or a FOIA request and submit that to them and say, will you identify who the other competitors are? And depending on the agency, they will let you know.
Thank you, Wes. Our last question comes from Diana. Diana asks, can I ask the agency to provide my competitors' price lists?
Ooh, that's a good question. I got to tell you, you can ask anything, really. But some agencies will provide that data. Again, you would do that via that FOIA request. But please keep in mind, and here's a suggestion for you when you submit your pricing. Identify to them that is company information and you don't want it shared with anybody. And if you don't tell the government that up front on that document and someone asks for it, they may give it out. But you can ask any question, that's for sure. Just be prepared for them to say, well, we can answer certain things. And you wouldn't want them knowing what your pricing is. So anyway.
Thank you so much, Wes. We've come to the end of our time today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend with us today. We really hope you found value in the content provided. Our goal at Journix is to help our customers intelligently invest their time and resources to achieve per person, per project profitability. Should you have additional questions or would like to see a more in-depth view of our Journix solution, our contact information is right here on the screen. We have webinars all month and in April, so don't forget to register for one of our other government contracting and DCAA webinars presented by industry professionals. If you like this webinar, please share it with your colleagues on LinkedIn. We hope that all your projects are successful. Have a great day.